still remember that evening like it happened yesterday. The hospital courtyard was glowing with golden lights, music floated through the air, and cameras flashed everywhere. Banners hung from the ceiling. Together we fight cancer. Hope for every family. $500,000 raised for cancer awareness. People clapped, laughed, and posed for pictures with paper ribbons pinned to their chests. For everyone else, it was just another charity gala. But for me, it was a sign of hope. My mom and I stood quietly near the back, her frail hand resting on my arm. She smiled, even though she was trembling slightly from the cold. Mom had always been like that, gentle, proud, never wanting to be seen as weak. Even after months of fighting late-stage cancer, she still managed to thank every nurse, every cleaner, everyone who helped her. That night, her eyes sparkled as she whispered, "Maybe they'll finally take me as one of their patients. Eva. Maybe this is a sign." I smiled and nodded, even though deep down, I was scared to believe it. The hospital's PR head, a tall man in a perfect suit, walked onto the stage. His voice echoed through the courtyard. "Tonight," he said proudly, "we celebrate generosity. We've raised $500,000 to support cancer awareness and struggling families across the city." The crowd erupted in applause. My mom clapped softly, her thin fingers trembling. I felt tears sting my eyes. I wanted to believe every word. For months, I had been working part-time shifts, waiting tables, babysitting, doing anything, just to keep up with my mom's medications. The treatments were too expensive, and the hospital had already turned us away twice because we couldn't pay the full amount up front. But hearing that announcement, it felt like a door was finally opening. 500,000, I whispered to myself. That's more than enough to help patients like Mom. I looked at her. She was smiling like a child on Christmas morning. Hope had returned to her tired eyes. I hadn't seen that in months. After the speech, the hospital's PR head continued. "Every dollar raised will help us bring awareness, fund research, and make cancer care accessible." Accessible. That word hit me the hardest. Mom squeezed my hand and said softly, "Maybe they'll start with us." As the event went on, volunteers served champagne, photographers snapped pictures, and executives laughed among themselves. I guided Mom to a chair near the fountain so she could rest. The music grew louder, and the speeches got longer. From where we sat, I could see patients watching from the windows of the oncology ward above. Faces pressed against the glass. Silent spectators to a celebration they couldn't afford to join. Still, I tried to stay positive. I wanted to believe this hospital cared. When the speeches ended, I stepped aside to make a call. I wanted to thank one of the nurses who had encouraged me to attend. That's when I overheard 2 staff members standing behind the curtain, whispering. "Can you believe it?" One of them said. $500,000 raised for awareness." "Awareness?" the other asked. "Not treatment?" The first one laughed quietly. "Of course not. It's all PR. None of this money goes to patients. It's for campaigns, ads, and staff bonuses." My heart dropped. My throat tightened. I stood frozen, holding my phone, unable to move. The music played on, but all I could hear was their conversation echoing in my mind. When I turned back toward the crowd, I saw my mom still sitting by the fountain, smiling at the stage, her eyes glimmering with hope. She believed she was closer to help that night. She believed those lights and speeches were meant for people like her. People who fought quietly, who didn't ask for much, who just wanted a chance. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I'd heard. I didn't want to break her heart, so I sat beside her, pretending to be moved by the speeches, pretending that maybe, somehow, this night still meant something good. But deep inside, something had cracked. I looked up at the hospital's glowing banners and whispered to myself, they raised $500,000, and not a single promise was meant for us. That night, I smiled beside my mother, pretending to share her hope, not knowing that the hospital we trusted would soon let her die over the price of $5,000. The next morning, I sat across from a woman in a gray blazer at the hospital's billing office. Her desk was spotless, her voice mechanical. She didn't look up from her computer when she said, "For the next round of chemotherapy, you'll need to make an initial payment of $5,000 up front." I froze. "Up front?" I repeated. I can't pay that much right now, but I can do installments. I can pay monthly." She finally looked up, her eyes blank behind square glasses. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Hospital policy requires full payment before treatment begins." I could hear my mother's soft coughs from the waiting area outside. She was sitting under a bright poster that read "Hope for All," because every life deserves a chance. I tried again. "Please, my mother's condition is getting worse every day. I can pay something today, maybe $1,000. I'm waiting for my next paycheck. Just let her start the treatment," the woman sighed, tapping her nails against the desk. "If we made exceptions for everyone, we'd never keep the lights on. You'll need to come back when you have the full amount." Her words felt like a slap. I wanted to scream. "You raised $500,000 for cancer awareness last night." I wanted to remind her of the balloons, the speeches, the promises. But my throat tightened. Instead, I said quietly, "Is there someone I can talk to? Maybe the fundraising department?" She shook her head. "Those funds aren't allocated for patient treatment. They're for awareness campaigns." That word again, awareness. It sounded like a cruel joke. When I stepped back into the hallway, I found my mother still waiting, holding a brochure with shaky hands. "They'll help us soon, won't they?" she asked softly. "Maybe they're helping others first." Her faith made my chest ache. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, that in this place kindness had a price tag. "I'll fix it, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "We'll figure it out." We sat together in the hallway for a while. Patients passed us in wheelchairs. Families whispered prayers. Doctors walked by without looking up. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. A nurse walked past us, recognized my mom, and gave her a kind smile. But when our eyes met, her expression changed. She quickly looked away and pretended to check her clipboard. A few minutes later, she slipped a folded note onto the chair beside me and walked off without a word. I opened it carefully. In small handwriting it said, "You're not the first one." I stared at the note for a long time, my hands trembling. I didn't know if she meant the first one denied treatment or the first one who believed their promises. Maybe both. When I looked up again, the glossy posters on the walls seemed to mock me. Smiling doctors, cheerful patients, and the words, "Together we save lives." My mother's voice broke through the noise. "Ava, honey, what did they say?" I swallowed hard, trying to sound calm. "They said, we just need to wait a little longer." She nodded slowly, trusting me completely. But as I helped her to her feet, something inside me broke. The quiet, obedient part of me that always believed people in white coats would do the right thing. As we walked out of the building, the bright poster by the exit caught my eye again. "Hope for All." I stopped, stared at it, then tore the hospital pamphlet in half. Under my breath, I whispered, "Then who is this money really helping?" That night, as my mom slept, I searched online for every article about the hospital's charity fund, and what I found made my blood run cold. That night I couldn't sleep. My mother's breathing was soft and shallow beside me, the oxygen machine humming in the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open, the hospital's glossy website glowing on the screen. There it was, the front page headline, "A Triumph of Compassion, $500,000 raised to fight cancer." I scrolled down slowly, reading every word. Photos of smiling patients holding flowers. Doctors standing proudly beside oversized checks. A woman in a headscarf hugging a nurse, both laughing as though they had just conquered death itself. But something felt wrong. I clicked on the photo captions. The names. They didn't link to any real profiles. No patient records, no local mentions. Just staged smiles. Stock images, maybe. Then I found one article quoting the hospital director. Every cent goes toward making sure no one faces cancer alone. A lump rose in my throat. No one faces cancer alone. My mother was facing it alone right now, because we didn't have $5,000. I dug deeper. The hospital's financial report was public. It took some effort, but I found it. Pages and pages of numbers that made no sense. Over $200,000 spent on media partnerships. Another $75,000 on executive bonuses for campaign success. My hand trembled on the mouse. The awareness money wasn't for patients. It was for appearances. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the screen. My chest felt tight, my stomach heavy. I thought of my mother's tired smile earlier that day, her soft faith in the system. And suddenly, a memory came flooding back. I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table. Mom was grading papers, her red pen tapping rhythmically. She looked up and said, "Eva, do you know why I never take shortcuts, even when no one's watching?" I shook my head. "Because honesty," she said, smiling gently, "is the one thing that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Once you sell it, you can never buy it back." That night, remembering her words, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Guilt, betrayal, helplessness, all tangled together. I had trusted the hospital, trusted the words painted on their walls. Hope, healing, humanity. But now I knew better. Hope was a business. Healing had a price. Humanity was negotiable. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Not to beg, this time to see. I waited outside the billing department, pretending to fill out forms. A young social worker sat across the hallway, nervously glancing around. Her badge said Marissa. When no one was looking, I approached her quietly. "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated but nodded. "Why would a hospital that raises so much money refuse to treat patients who can't pay?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Marissa looked around again before leaning closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We're told to turn away anyone who can't pay up front. They say the fundraising is for awareness. Ads, events, publicity. Not treatment." Her eyes softened. "You're not the first one to ask that, you know. But if you speak up, they'll call it a misunderstanding. Or worse, blacklist your family from care." Her words chilled me. "Blacklist?" She nodded slightly. "It happens. Quietly." Then she gathered her papers and walked away before anyone noticed us. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. That's when I knew. This wasn't just unfair. It was deliberate. A system built to look kind while turning its back on the people who needed it most. That night, I sat by my mom's bedside again. She smiled weakly. "You're quiet today, sweetheart." "I'm just thinking, Mom," I said softly, holding her hand. "About how sometimes kindness comes with a price tag." She squeezed my fingers gently. "Then it isn't kindness, Eva." Her words hit me like a spark in the dark. And something inside me shifted. I opened my phone, scrolled to the recorder app, and hit start. The next morning, when I walked into the hospital again, I kept my phone recording inside my pocket. Every word, every refusal, every lie. If they wanted to sell hope as a product, I was going to show the world the price they were charging. As the recorder's red light blinked in my pocket, Eva whispered to herself, "You built this on lies." Let's see how well it stands when the truth starts talking. The days began to blur together, a quiet rhythm of pain, pills, and waiting. My mother's strength was fading, little by little, like a candle burning low. Each morning, I would check her breathing, measure her temperature, and whisper, "We'll get through this, Mom," even when I wasn't sure anymore. The hospital had stopped calling. When I went there again to ask for a follow-up checkup, the receptionist wouldn't even look me in the eye. "I'm sorry," she said in a rehearsed tone. "We can't proceed without your account being cleared." "I just need her test results," I pleaded. "She's getting weaker every day." "I understand," she said, but her eyes said otherwise. "Maybe try the charity ward?" But when I called later, the line went silent after my name. The next day, the offer was no longer available. So I brought my mother home. I turned our small living room into a hospital room. Clean sheets, a borrowed oxygen cylinder, and a chair that became my bed. Every sound she made jolted me awake. At night, I spoon-fed her soup slowly, one trembling sip at a time. She would smile weakly and whisper, "You've always been the strong one, Eva." Some nights when I thought she was asleep, I cried quietly beside her bed. The weight of helplessness pressed on my chest like a stone. The medicines were almost finished. I tried everything. Herbal teas, old home remedies, even prayers whispered under my breath. I sold my phone to buy pain relievers. One evening I got a call from a doctor I recognized, Dr. Miller, the one who had always spoken kindly to my mom. His voice was heavy. "Eva," he said softly, "I wanted to help. I really did. I suggested you for the charity program, but the administration—" He stopped. "They said your case could bring bad publicity." My heart sank. "Bad publicity?" He hesitated. "I'm sorry. They don't want stories that make them look inconsistent." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. In the end, I just said, "Thank you for trying," and hung up. That night, the house was quiet. The only sound was the wind brushing against the windows and my mother's slow, uneven breaths. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Don't blame yourself, my dear," she whispered. "You did everything a daughter could do." I shook my head, tears spilling over. "It should have been enough." She smiled faintly, her voice soft. "Promise me something?" "Anything." "Don't let them forget what they did." I nodded, clutching her hand. "I promise, Mom." That night, I watched her fall asleep, her chest rising and falling gently, like waves against the shore. I didn't know it would be the last time. The next morning I woke up to silence. Her hand was cold, her lips peaceful. For a moment I just sat there, holding her hand, unable to move. The sun was rising, golden light filling the room. It felt cruel. How beautiful the world looked in that moment. As I began to gather her things, I noticed an envelope on the nightstand. My name written on it, in her shaky handwriting. I held it close but couldn't open it right away. It took me hours, maybe days, before I found the strength. When I finally did, the paper was soft, her handwriting faint but steady. "My dearest Eva, if you're reading this, it means my journey is over, but yours isn't. You were born with a voice meant to speak for those who can't. Don't let them silence you. Promise me you'll make them listen." My hands trembled as I read those words. "Promise me you'll make them listen." That sentence became more than her last wish. It became my purpose. As Eva folded the letter, her tears fell onto the ink. She looked out the window and whispered, "I will, Mom. I'll make them listen, even if it's the last thing I do." Weeks passed, but time didn't heal anything. The silence in the house was louder than ever, her chair empty, her favorite mug still on the table. Every corner of that small home whispered memories I wasn't ready to face. Then, One afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. St. Weller Hospital invites you to our annual Cancer Awareness Gala, celebrating hope and healing. The same words, the same glittering tone, the same place that turned my mother away. At first, I almost deleted it, but then I thought of her letter. Promise me you'll make them listen. That night, I ironed my only decent dress and borrowed a press badge from a friend who freelanced for a local paper. If they were going to keep pretending, I would make sure someone saw the truth. When I arrived, the hospital lobby was transformed again. Chandeliers, champagne, a red carpet lined with photographers. Giant banners read, "Together we fight cancer." It was the same stage where I once stood holding my mother's arm, full of hope. Now, I stood in the shadows, holding my phone steady, recording. Doctors, donors, and local politicians mingled like movie stars. Laughter echoed through the hall. A large display screen showed smiling patients, the same ones from last year. I recognized one photo, a woman they called Clara, supposedly a survivor. But I remembered seeing her before, not as a patient, but as a hospital receptionist. They hadn't even bothered to change the story. The hospital director, Mr. Blake, stood at the podium, his voice booming. "Last year, we raised $500,000. This year we've surpassed that. Together, we're changing lives." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed, I could barely breathe. My fingers tightened around the phone. Then, as the guests raised their glasses, I heard him laugh to another board member. "Charity's the best business, isn't it? Hope sells better than medicine," they both chuckled. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth behind their smiles. I turned my camera slightly, capturing their faces, their champagne glasses, their shameless laughter. Nearby, a group of nurses stood in a corner, not joining the celebration. Their eyes looked tired. I walked closer, pretending to check my phone. One of them, the same nurse who once slipped me a note, recognized me. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You came back," she whispered. "I had to see it for myself," I said quietly. "Is it still the same?" She glanced around before answering. "Worse. They stopped the charity cases completely. The money goes to advertising and executive bonuses." My chest tightened. "So no one gets help?" She shook her head slowly. "They warned us never to talk about the real patients. Anyone who questions gets transferred or fired." Her voice trembled as she added, "We're not saving lives anymore. We're selling an image." A cheer broke out near the stage. I turned to see Mr. Blake holding a giant check for New Hope Fund, $750,000. Cameras flashed as he smiled proudly, calling it a victory for humanity. I felt sick. As the gala continued, waiters poured wine, the band played soft jazz, and speeches about compassion filled the air. I filmed everything. The scripted kindness, the polished greed, the faces that smiled for the camera, but never looked toward the real suffering. By the end of the night, my phone was full of recordings. Every lie, every laugh, every word that turned my mother's pain into their business. When the guests began leaving, I slipped outside into the cold night. The hospital lights glowed behind me, bright and spotless. For a long moment, I just stood there. Then I whispered to myself, "They built this place on people like her. It's time someone showed what's underneath." As Eva turned to leave, the nurse followed her out and whispered, trembling, "They warned us never to talk about the real patients, but maybe it's time someone did." The next morning, Eva walked into the hospital not as a grieving daughter, but as a storm finally ready to break. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from holding too much silence for too long. The billing office looked the same as always. Bright lights, polished counters, fake smiles. The same place where she once begged for her mother's life. The woman behind the desk barely looked up. Name? Eva's voice was steady but cold. You know my name. The woman hesitated, then forced a polite smile. How can I help you today, Ms. Lawson? Eva's eyes were burning now. You raised $500,000 for cancer awareness. Her tone sharpened, words slicing through the air. My mother was cancer. She was awareness. Why wasn't she worth $5,000? The typing stopped. The woman froze, mouth slightly open. A few staff members turned to look. Eva's voice grew louder, trembling with fury and heartbreak. You made speeches about saving lives while turning away the people who needed you most. You had the money, you just didn't have the heart. A security guard stepped closer, whispering into his radio. Someone in a suit, the hospital's PR director, as came rushing out of an office nearby. Miss, please calm down. You're disrupting our work. Work? Eva snapped. You mean your business, because that's what this is, right? You sell fake hope and call it compassion. The PR director's smile vanished. His tone dropped low and threatening. If you continue spreading false information, we'll have to take legal action for defamation. Eva laughed bitterly. You think truth is defamation? Fine. Then sue me for remembering what you did to my mother. People were watching now. Nurses, patients, visitors. A nurse placed her hand gently over her mouth, trying to hide her shock. The director glared at them until they looked away. Eva grabbed a pamphlet from the counter, one that said, "No one fights alone." She tore it slowly, piece by piece, until only the words "fights alone" remained in her hand. You forgot what this means, she said quietly. But I didn't. Then she walked out. Outside, the wind was cold and sharp. Eva's tears blurred the sunlight, but she didn't stop walking. Her heart pounded with a mix of grief and rage, but underneath it all, a new strength was forming. That night, she set her laptop on the kitchen table, the same table where she once prepared her mother's tea. She opened the folder named Mom. Inside, audio files, videos, photos. The gala recordings, the director's words, the fake patients. Every file was a truth they'd tried to bury. For hours, Eva worked without pause, editing clips, syncing sound, cutting between the hospital's glittering lies and her mother's quiet suffering. In one shot, the director raised a glass. In the next, her mother coughed weakly, whispering, "Don't give up on them, Eva. Make them better." Eva paused, her hands trembling. Her reflection in the dark laptop screen looked nothing like the woman she once was. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. She uploaded the final cut, a 6-minute video titled "The Price of Hope." Her finger hovered over the post button. The cursor blinked. "What if they destroy me for this?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from her mother, saved months ago. She pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the room, soft and tired, but full of love. "Do what's right, Eva, even if it costs you. The truth always heals." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She looked at the screen again, at the play button glowing softly in the dark. Then she took a deep breath and clicked post. As the video uploaded, Eva whispered, "This one's for you, Mom." The progress bar hit 100%. The storm had begun. The video went live at midnight. By morning, Eva's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She hadn't slept. She'd sat at the table all night, staring at the view counter rising faster than her heartbeat. 1,000 views, 10,000, 100,000. Then, 1,000,000. The title burned across every screen. The hospital that let my mother die for $5,000. People were furious. Comments poured in by the thousands. Strangers crying, sharing stories of loved ones who had suffered the same fate. One woman wrote, "My dad died waiting for approval from that same hospital." Another said, They did this to my sister too. Thank you, Eva, for speaking out. By sunrise, hashtags began trending. 500K but no treatment. Justice for Eva's mom. Profit over patient's Twitter, YouTube, news feeds. Everywhere. Eva's face was suddenly all over the internet. Screenshots of her tearful confession, clips of the hospital gala. Even the director's arrogant laughter caught on camera. Within 24 hours, the story hit the local news. Within 48, national media picked it up. Outside the hospital gates, protesters gathered with handmade signs. Help patients, not profits. 500K for hope, 5K for life? Nurses watched from the windows. Some cried, some turned away. Inside, the hospital board scrambled to contain the disaster. That afternoon, the hospital released an official statement. These claims are deeply misleading. The woman behind this video is emotionally unstable and seeking attention after her mother's passing. We remain committed to patient care. Eva watched the statement on her cracked phone screen. She didn't cry this time. She smiled sadly. That's all you've got? She whispered, her inbox filled with interview requests. Journalists, bloggers, podcasters, all wanting her side of the story. But Eva stayed quiet. She didn't want fame. She wanted truth. Still, the world wanted her. By the third day, she stepped outside to buy groceries and found a reporter waiting by her car. Eva Lawson? He asked gently. I'm from the Herald. Can we talk? She hesitated. If this is about... It's not just about the video, he said, lowering his voice. We found something? You need to see this. Her heart skipped. What do you mean? The reporter pulled out a manila envelope, sealed tight. Internal documents. From someone inside the hospital. Eva's throat went dry. What's in them? He looked around, cautious. Proof of internal fraud. Misuse of donation funds. Bonuses paid to executives from charity money. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. It was truth, finally tangible. He continued. We're publishing tomorrow, but we wanted to confirm details with you first. You started something big. Eva, the city's watching. For a moment, she just stood there. Speechless, she looked past him, across the street, where a billboard showed the hospital's old slogan, Together, we heal. Now it looked like a lie carved in light. Will this change anything? She asked softly. The reporter nodded. It already has. As he left, Eva opened the envelope in her car. Inside were copies of internal memos, phrases jumping off the page. Reallocate awareness funds to executive incentives. Delay non-paying patient treatments. Marketing impact exceeds patient outcome priority. Her chest tightened. Every sentence was another stab, confirmation that her mother had died not from illness, but from greed. Eva leaned back, whispering, You finally get justice. Mom, outside rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. That night she sat again at her table, this time surrounded by light instead of darkness. She opened her laptop, ready to write one last post. You called me bitter. Maybe I am, but bitterness doesn't kill people. Neglect does. My mother's name was Margaret Lawson. She taught for 32 years. She gave more to this world than your entire boardroom ever will. Within minutes, her post was shared thousands of times. TV anchors debated her story. Talk shows invited her to speak. Even politicians began calling for an investigation into the hospital's finances. Eva turned off her phone and looked out the window. Somewhere beyond the rain, she felt her mother near, quiet, proud. She whispered, We did it, Mom. They're finally listening. Her phone buzzed again. The same reporter's name flashing on the screen. His voice was urgent. Eva, The documents were just confirmed by a whistleblower inside the hospital. There's a lot more than fraud. You need to see this. Tonight. The clock ticked past midnight. Rain drummed softly on Eva's apartment window as she and the journalist, Mark Heller, sat surrounded by open folders, coffee cups, and exhaustion. On the floor lay hundreds of pages of leaked memos, invoices, and financial statements. Each document was worse than the last. Proof of corruption. Proof of greed. Proof of everything Eva had claimed. Eva's voice trembled as she read one aloud. Reallocate patient care donations to fund VIP gala expenses. She lowered the page slowly, her eyes glistening. They used people's donations. To buy champagne? Mark nodded grimly. And to pay bonuses. Look here. 5 executives received $80,000 each the same month the hospital rejected your mother's treatment request. The words felt like acid. Eva pressed her hands over her face. My mother could have been saved for less than 1/10 of that. Mark leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. Eva, we're going to make them answer for this. But we need to be careful. Once we publish, they'll come after us hard. She looked around her small apartment. The chipped paint, the flickering bulb, the stack of bills on the counter. Then she pictured the hospital's gala hall from her video. Golden chandeliers, tables draped in silk, executives laughing in tuxedos. 2 worlds, one built on lies, the other on loss. Her mother's photo sat on the table beside her laptop. Eva whispered, For you, Mom. By morning, the pair had crafted the opening lines of their exposé. While patients begged for mercy, executives toasted with $1,000 wine. This is not healthcare, it's business, and behind the doors of St. Haverly Medical Center, business is booming. Mark looked up from his screen. Once this goes out, there's no going back. Eva nodded. Good. They submitted the draft to the Herald's editorial team, attaching every document, photo, and timestamp. The editor's response came within an hour. Publishing tomorrow at 9 a.m. Prepare for fallout. Meanwhile, inside St. Haverly's towering glass offices, panic had replaced confidence. In the boardroom, a dozen executives sat in tense silence as the CEO slammed a printed headline onto the table. Do you people understand what happens if this leaks? He barked. We're not talking about bad publicity. This could destroy us. A PR manager spoke up timidly. We can release a new statement, claim the documents are forged. Forged? The CEO snapped. Then find someone to take the blame. Anyone. I don't care if it's a janitor or an intern. He turned to the head of legal. Contact the firm. We'll need top litigators. Immediately. Back in her apartment, Eva brewed another pot of coffee. Her inbox was overflowing. Support messages, interview requests, strangers offering donations for legal help. Then her phone buzzed. A private number, she answered cautiously. Hello? A distorted male voice replied, cold and measured. Take down your video, Eva. Now. Her breath hitched. Who is this? You think this is a game? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Delete everything or we'll ruin you. The line went dead. Her heart pounded. She stared at her reflection in the dark window. Pale, trembling, but determined. Moments later, another text arrived. You were warned. She showed it to Mark. His face hardened. They're scared, that's good. But don't be alone tonight. They play dirty. Eva nodded, locking her door. Still, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the floorboards felt louder. Every car outside felt like a threat. But she refused to back down. She opened her laptop and began typing a message to her growing followers. If you're reading this, know that I won't stop. Not until every name responsible faces justice. My mother deserved care, not excuses. The post went viral within hours. Eva Fights Back began trending. The next day, the Herald published the exposé. The city woke up to a storm of headlines. Charity hospital spent patient funds on luxury galas. Whistleblower confirms internal fraud. St. Haverly scandal, executive bonuses over lives. Social media exploded. Protesters returned to the hospital gates, louder, angrier, unstoppable now. Inside the hospital boardroom, a lawyer whispered, "Sir, there's no way to contain this anymore." The CEO's hand shook as he poured water into a glass. "Then we bury her," he muttered. "Legally," the lawyer clarified. The CEO smirked darkly. "Legally, for now." That evening, Eva sat with Mark, watching the news report. Her video played again, this time broadcast nationwide. The anchor's voice echoed. "The woman behind the viral exposé has received threats but refuses to stay silent." Meanwhile, the hospital faces multiple investigations. Eva exhaled slowly. "It's starting, isn't it?" Mark nodded. "This is just the beginning." Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one wasn't from an unknown number. It was from the hospital's legal department. "You are hereby notified that St. Haverly Medical Center has retained counsel. Cease all defamatory publications immediately. Failure to comply will result in legal action." She stared at the screen, then laughed softly, half in fear, half in defiance. "Let them come," she said. Truth doesn't need a lawyer, but deep down, she felt the weight of what was coming next. As she turned off the TV, another message appeared on her screen. This one from Mark. "Eva, they've hired lawyers. Prepare for court." The courthouse stood like a fortress of glass and stone, surrounded by flashing cameras and murmuring crowds. Reporters called out Eva's name as she stepped out of the black car, clutching a worn photo of her mother in her hand. The sky was gray, heavy with rain clouds, but Eva felt strangely calm, as if her mother's spirit walked beside her. "Eva." "Eva, do you regret posting the video?" a reporter shouted. She stopped, met his eyes, and said softly, "No, I regret trusting silence." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side sat the hospital's legal team, rows of sharp suits, expensive watches, and cold stares. On the other, Eva sat beside her lawyer, Ms. Patel, and journalist Mark Heller. Her palms trembled slightly, but her expression was steady. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session. Case number 2197. St. Haverly Medical Center versus Eva Marlowe." The hospital's lead attorney, a tall man with silver hair, rose first. His voice was calm, rehearsed, almost bored. "Your Honor, this case is about defamation. The defendant, Ms. Marlowe, knowingly published false claims that have caused immense financial and reputational damage to one of the city's most respected institutions." He turned toward Eva. "She manipulated emotional tragedy into personal fame," murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eva stared ahead, unmoving. She'd prepared for this. The gaslighting, the twisting of truth, the public humiliation. When it was her lawyer's turn, Ms. Patel stood tall and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, this case isn't about defamation. It's about deception. A hospital that chose profit over patients, and a daughter who refused to let her mother's death be buried under lies." A quiet gasp spread through the courtroom. The hospital paraded witnesses, executives, PR officers, even a nurse who had been pressured to speak against Eva. "She was emotional," one administrator said. "She misunderstood how funding works. The gala was for awareness, not treatment." Mark scribbled notes, shaking his head. He whispered, "They're playing the same script." But Ms. Patel smiled slightly. "Let them," she murmured. "Their words will hang them." Finally, it was Eva's turn to testify. She walked to the stand, her hands clasped tightly. The courtroom lights were harsh, but she looked composed, not as a victim, but as a witness for every forgotten patient. Ms. Marlowe, the hospital's lawyer, began. You claim the hospital refused your mother's treatment due to payment issues. Do you have proof? Eva met his gaze. Yes, and so do you. Whispers filled the room. Ms. Patel approached the bench. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit Exhibit C, an audio recording dated March 12, 2023. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom went still as the recording played. A voice echoed from the speakers, cold, dismissive, unmistakable. Don't waste money on lost causes. Cancer patients don't pay back. Gasps erupted. One juror covered her mouth. A reporter dropped his pen. Eva looked down, tears welling in her eyes. That voice. She remembered it from the gala night, behind the laughter and toasts. The judge leaned forward. Whose voice is this? Ms. Patel replied firmly. The hospital's director of operations, Mr. Lewis Grant. All eyes turned toward the director, who sat pale and sweating. He muttered something to his lawyer, but it was too late. The damage was done. The prosecution tried to recover. That doesn't prove mismanagement of funds. Ms. Patel smiled coldly. Then let's discuss the rest. She presented printed memos, signed invoices, internal emails showing funds diverted from patient aid into gala expenses, PR bonuses, and executive retreats. Each document was like a hammer blow. When the journalist Mark was called to testify, he laid out the investigation, how he verified the memos, traced donation accounts, and interviewed multiple insiders. One former nurse even appeared in court, trembling as she confessed. They told us to tell patients we were out of beds, but we weren't. We just couldn't take anyone who couldn't pay. Eva watched, silent, but burning with emotion. It wasn't just about her mother anymore. It was about all the others, the unseen, unheard, untreated. By afternoon, public outrage had spilled beyond the courthouse walls. Crowds outside held signs. Justice for patients. Health is not for sale. $500K for PR, $0 for care. Inside, the hospital's defense began to crumble. The CEO refused to testify. The PR head resigned mid-trial. The judge called a recess. Hours later, when everyone returned, he delivered his ruling. After reviewing all submitted evidence and testimony, the judge began. This court finds that St. Haverly Medical Center engaged in deceptive fundraising practices and intentional neglect of patient care. He paused, letting the words settle like thunder. The hospital's license is hereby suspended pending a full federal audit. Several officials are recommended for criminal investigation. And as for Ms. Marlowe, Eva held her breath. She acted not with malice, but with courage. Her actions served public interest and exposed serious ethical violations. Case dismissed. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, tears. Even the stenographer wiped her eyes. Eva covered her mouth, overcome. Mark hugged her tightly. You did it, Eva. You made them listen, she whispered. Trembling, we made them listen. Outside, the courthouse steps were filled with people. Strangers who had followed her story, cancer survivors, grieving families, even hospital staff who had quit in protest. As Eva emerged, they began to clap, then cheer. Reporters pushed forward, but she barely heard them. A little girl held up a sign that made Eva stop in her tracks. In big, bold letters it read, $5,000 wasn't the cost of treatment, it was the price of truth. Eva's throat tightened. She smiled through tears, lifting her mother's photo high for all to see. The crowd roared louder. Somewhere above the noise, a single thought echoed in her heart, clear, steady, and full of peace. You did what's right, Eva. And for the first time since her mother's death, she finally felt free. Mini hook. As flashbulbs flickered and chants filled the air, Eva whispered under her breath, "This isn't just the end of their story. It's the beginning of mine." A soft winter sun filtered through the tall windows of a modest office painted in warm cream. The sign above the door read, "The Willow Project," its letters hand-painted by volunteers. Inside, a small crowd of patients and families waited quietly, holding files, hope, and trembling hands. Eva walked through the narrow hallway, her hair tied back, wearing a plain white blouse. She paused to greet every person, an elderly man, a young mother, a teenager clutching his medical papers. Each one had a story. Each one reminded her of her. "Good morning, Mrs. Patel," she said, smiling as the woman nodded gratefully. "Your treatment fund was approved. You'll start next week." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Bless you, Miss Eva. Bless your mother, too." Eva smiled gently. "She's the reason we're here." A year had passed since the courtroom verdict, since the storm that had torn open an institution and awakened a city. St. Haverly Hospital no longer existed. The government audit exposed millions misused, and several officials faced prison. The scandal had reshaped public trust, forcing hospitals to publish transparent reports for the first time. But Eva didn't chase headlines anymore. She had turned her pain into something steady, quiet, and deeply human. A foundation built in her mother's name, the Willow Project, inspired by her mom's favorite tree. Her mother once told her, "The willow bends with the wind, but never breaks." And that was how Eva survived. Today was special. A local news channel had come to interview her for their Heroes Among Us segment. The small crew set up cameras in her office, surrounded by handwritten thank you cards and faded photographs of patients who had recovered with the project's help. In the center of her desk stood a framed photo of her mother. Gentle eyes, silver hair, smiling softly in a floral scarf. The reporter, a kind woman named Dana, adjusted her mic. "Ready, Eva?" Eva nodded. "Ready." "All right," Dana began, her tone warm but professional. "You've helped over 300 families receive cancer treatment this year. That's incredible. What gave you the courage to start?" Eva looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo. "For a long time," she began quietly, "I thought courage meant fighting back. But I learned it also means keeping a promise." Dana tilted her head. "A promise?" Eva smiled faintly. "To my mother. She asked me to make them listen. I didn't know what she meant at the time, but now I do. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about making sure no one else is ever told their life cost too much." The camera zoomed closer as her voice softened. "She was turned away because I couldn't pay $5,000. And yet, that number built this place. Every dollar we raise here actually goes to a family in need. Not to ads, not to galas. Just to people?" Dana smiled, visibly moved. "Would your mother be proud, do you think?" Eva looked at the photo again. A beam of light from the window landed across her mother's face, soft and golden. "I think she'd say," Eva whispered, "that love finally did what money couldn't. It healed." The interview ended, but the cameras lingered, capturing candid moments. Eva walking through the treatment room, laughing softly with a child coloring on the floor, helping an old man fill out paperwork, hugging a nurse who had once worked at St. Haverly before quitting in protest. Outside, children played under a tree in the small garden, a young willow planted in her mother's memory. Its leaves swayed in the wind, just like her mother's hair once did when she sat by the hospital window, smiling despite the pain. Eva watched it for a long time. She remembered those nights, spoon-feeding her mother, crying in silence, begging strangers for mercy. She remembered the anger, the helplessness, the guilt. And she remembered the voice that had carried her through the darkest moment. Do what's right. Eva. She had done it. Later that evening, Eva sat alone in her office, finishing paperwork as the last rays of sunlight faded. On her desk lay an old, creased envelope, the one her mother had written before passing away. Eva had read it so many times the ink was starting to fade. She unfolded it carefully. My dearest Eva, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay. But don't let them take your kindness, my love. The world needs people who care more than they should. You are one of them. Promise me you'll plant something when it's over, something that will outlive the pain. Eva smiled softly through her tears. She whispered, I did, Mom. I planted a willow. As she stepped outside, the streetlights flickered on. The world seemed quieter now, gentler somehow. Across the street, a small bakery owner waved at her. Miss Eva, we saw you on TV. You're an inspiration. She waved back shyly. Thank you. People knew her name now, but not because she shouted the loudest, because she told the truth and never stopped caring. That night she walked to the willow tree, its slender branches brushing her shoulders. Beneath it she placed a small candle and whispered. They raised $500,000 to raise awareness. But I raised one voice, and that was enough. The flame flickered, steady and golden. As she turned to leave, a young nurse from her team called out, Eva, there's a letter for you, from the Cancer Care Council. Eva opened it right there under the tree. Her eyes widened as she read. They had chosen the Willow Project to receive a national grant, $500,000. The exact amount the hospital once raised in greed. But this time, it would save lives. She smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's like the universe remembered what was lost, she whispered. Then she looked up at the night sky, her mother's voice echoing softly in her mind. Love could heal. Now it finally does. They raised $500,000 to raise awareness. I raised one voice, and that was enough. They refused to treat my mom for $5,000, but her truth treated a world that had forgotten how to care.